Good morning. So to begin with, I want to look at the scale of the marketing challenge faced, the key aims and the objectives. So for Pieta House, our marketing challenge is immensely complex. And it's not one that you're probably more familiar with, because it isn't about margin, it isn't about shifting product, it isn't about brand loyalty, and it's certainly not about competition. The marketing objective for Pieta House is to dramatically reduce the demand for our product and our services. And ultimately, our challenge is to eradicate suicide. In 2016, 399 of our sons and daughters in Ireland took their lives by suicide. And none of those should have happened. So our aim at Pieta House is to bring that number to zero. We know within the suicide prevention world that for every person who dies by suicide, there are at least 135 people who are directly impacted negatively by that death. They can be friends, they can be family, they can be partners, they can be colleagues, team members, but they all are negatively impacted by that. So in 2016 alone, there were about 54,000 people in Ireland who were directly impacted by the death of someone through suicide. Our ultimate commercial success then for Pieta House is the removal of the need for our services and ultimately the demise of our organisation. At Pieta House, we work with an issue, and this is really important, that was illegal until 1993 and was a mortal sin until the 1960s. So to put that in context for all the millennials, there is a thing called religion. It used to happen in this country. But a mortal sin, there are two major types of sin, a mortal sin and a venial sin. I'm not going to go through catechism with you because I don't know it. But a venial sin is one for which you can go to confessions, ask for forgiveness and receive forgiveness and leave with a clean slate. A mortal sin is a sin from which there is no redemption. It is a sin for which you are condemned to the fires of hell for eternity. I'm very conscious that I'm from the same town as Ian Paisley, and when I speak like that you might get a bit worried, but nevertheless. But we're talking about not even 2 generations ago. So there are people who very strongly will identify with that sense of not speaking about suicide, because who is going to talk about the agony of knowing or believing that their loved one is burning in the fires of hell with no redemption? Who is going to speak up about a crime that has been committed suicide? Because if you admit to committing that crime, you cannot benefit from the proceeds of crime. Therefore, you cannot get a widow's pension, you cannot access savings, you cannot get any of those things. So that's the country we were in up until 1993. Pieta House has existed since 2006. So our challenge of communicating what we do is very much shrouded in shame and shrouded in secrecy. What we do at Pieta House now is we offer 3 primary types of services. So we offer prevention services through education and training to try and build the resilience of Ireland and the people in Ireland to not need our services in the first place, to not become suicidal in the first place. For those people who are actively suicidal or do actively engage in self-harm, we offer intervention services where we literally intervene at the point of suicidal ideation, and through a process of psychotherapy we try and bring them to a new hope for their future. And we also work in postvention. Postvention is working with people who have been bereaved by suicide. So they're the 3 major types of work that we do. So in terms of the challenge that we had for Darkness into Light, the scale of the challenge is 3 years ago, the official figure of the number of people who died by suicide was over 500. 2016 it was 400, so you can see already there is progress. But it's an average of 10 suicides per week. And of those 10 people who die by suicide, 8 of them are men. So we have a massive challenge in accessing those men. And it's also important to point out that we have 3 times as many deaths by suicide in this country than we have road deaths. But we have nowhere near the resources in suicide prevention that we have in road traffic prevention. So this image, as you can see, is an egg. And the reason I have it up here is because I want to talk a little bit about what we do at Pieta House. People come to us in a very fragile state. They come to us in a point where there are fractures, but it's not yet broken. And the reason I'm using an egg is because if I give you an egg, there's a way you have to hold it. If you hold it too tight, you'll crush it. If you don't hold it tight enough, you'll drop it and it breaks. So what our therapists do in Pieta House is a very intricate piece of work of taking this fragile, fractured person and trying to bring them to a point of strength and stability and move them on. And if you incubate an egg properly, we know that inside that little hard shell, there is some new life. So that's kind of part of what we do at Pieta House. The vision of Pieta House is of a world where suicide and self-harm and stigma have been replaced by hope, self-care and acceptance. And what we do in our therapy rooms with our therapists on a one-to-one basis with clients is take their thoughts of suicide and replace them with thoughts of hope, and take their actual self-harm and replace that with actual self-care, tools for living. But the big challenge we have, and it relates specifically to darkness into light as well, is taking stigma and replacing it with acceptance. Because stigma is the single biggest killer in the country. The stigma of suicide, and you can understand that from the perspective of the mortal sin and the crime, but the stigmas that lead people to the point of suicidal ideation are huge. We know from the 36,000 people who have come through the doors of Pieta House that what brings them to our door is racism, shame, homophobia, transphobia, body shaming, other people's opinions on their net worth rather than their self-worth, their own self-loathing. This is what brings people to the doors of Pieta House. And these are the stigmas that we have to fight. Because if we can eradicate these, we can eradicate suicide. At Pieta, we have 240 of the best psychotherapists in the country working 6 days a week across our 15 centres. And last year alone, in 2017, 7,117 people came through our doors. Now, if you take that matrix of 135 people directly impacted, last year in Pieta House alone, 965,000 people have been spared the agony of a loss through suicide. The 965,000 people are in this room. We just don't know whether we would have been one of those people or not. But that's what our work is about. And that's why our ultimate objective is to no longer need to exist. So within Pieta, we know that we have to empower the country to take ownership of the issue of suicide and the stigmas that lead people to the point of suicide. But equally, we need to empower the country to take ownership of the solutions in suicide prevention and to support each other and network each other to eradicate suicide. So aligned to this is another huge challenge facing us, and that is the inevitable loss of public trust and confidence in the charitable sector. So when you get 14% of your funding from the government and the rest has to be fundraised, you really need trust and you really need confidence. And when you go through a process like Console and the CRC and all of these different things, the difficulties that we have are immense. So again, we need to communicate, we need to engage, we need to keep ourselves open and transparent, and finding a mechanism and a tool to deliver that is a very difficult thing to do. In the last 2 years, we've opened 4 new counselling centres, which incur significant additional cost, but ultimately we exist to serve a need. We need to identify the need and we need to serve the need. So cost is not something we plan, it's something we incur.